Hello and welcome to Access Chat. We're delighted to welcome regular guest here today, Paul Smythe from Barclays. Paul is returning since last summer. So what's been keeping you busy? We've not seen you for a while. So
Wow.
what have you been up to?
Sure. Well, thanks, Neil. Hi, Deborah, Antonio, and everyone. Great to be back. So thanks for the invite. And a thanks to the three of you, really, just to keep Access Chat, the community, established and going and growing. I think it's doing a fab job, and interesting guests you're getting and pulling in people that are interested in or working in the accessibility agenda. I think, oh gosh, what's been going on with me the last few months? I think one of the biggies. So, as well as being the severely sight impaired diabetic, I was off for a couple of months with major back surgery. Had a couple of slip discs. So, I think last year taught me about chronic pain, about resilience, about how we often sort of think about impairments in isolation, but actually when they're sort of added on top of one another, how that kind of limits, access and opportunity and whatnot. So, again, it's been quite useful from a day job perspective. And I think in terms of the accessibility agenda at Barclays, our team is growing. We have a larger role in remit. And I think maybe, just a couple of things that stand out over the last few months. One was some work we did to redesign an online banking security token. So we had lots of feedback from typically older consumers with a range of access needs, that it was difficult punching in using these sort of calculators to do their online banking. So again, redesigning and really applying an inclusive design mindset. So less about checkpoints and more about people, and understanding how we make this token work for everyone for a broader range of access needs. So that was really interesting sort of research project involving a wide range of disabled customers, colleagues, suppliers, stakeholders, and ultimately it led to a Business Disability Forum Smart Award, which is great. Icing on the cake at the end of last year. I think the other element that we've been doing lots of work in, sort of hard at work over recent weeks and months, is around getting our online banking website accessibility accredited. So by AbilityNet, they're UK leading access consultants. They've been going for 20 years and really applying that expert audit and disabled user testing to make sure that our banking website is both accessible for those who need it, but actually easier to use for everyone else. So that's been a really interesting sort of learning curve too. So concluding and getting that accreditation in the last month. So something we're super proud of, and sort of rolling them out more broadly. So I think those are the sort of embedding accessibility into our services. I think, embedding it into our culture, lots around awareness and training of staff, lots around how do we take the gospel of accessibility more broadly and sort of burst the accessibility bubble. So, to the likes of Gartner, so at their symposium in the autumn, and talking to a bunch of CIOs about accessibility and getting it, more broadly raised up the pecking order. That's been quite interesting too. And it's kind of comforting to see, right, in the last couple of months, we've done a range of media articles in mainstream press in the UK, so in The Guardian and The Times, around inclusive design and disability and our accessible services. And it's been one of the most sort of highly read articles we've ever done. So it reinforces to me that people are interested in and excited about accessibility. So whether you work in this topic or whether you're a sort of recipient or someone who can benefit from this topic, it's becoming a sort of more important to more people, of interest to more people. So yeah, it's kind of a varied, chaotic, exciting time.
Paul, I know that most of the Access community know who you are, but for anybody that's joining us the first time or watching this interview later, do you mind telling the audience who you are? Of course, you're with Barclays, but tell them a little
Sure.
bit more about who Paul Smythe is.
Yep. Okay. So yeah, let me sort of back up a bit. So I lead digital accessibility for Barclays, something I've been involved with for the past 5 years. Before then, I spent a decade working in finance and risk roles within the bank, before making the switch to head up our accessibility programs, and in particular the digital accessibility. So i.e. how we make our websites, our apps, our cash machines easy for everyone to use. And again, there's been a bunch of pioneering services we've done as a firm. So from sort of talking cash machines to virtual sign language interpreter services. And really, we've seen a sort of a catalyst, a snowball of, well, what more can we do? And we've kind of seen a sort of change in how we rethink and reframe accessibility within the bank, about it not being doing enough. So, i.e., don't discriminate against the disabled and make compliant products, and more about creating a great experience for a greater number of people. So, i.e., leaning into accessibility, we get broader business benefits, things that go beyond just folks with disabilities, and actually realizing that actually people with situational or temporary impairments also sort of stand to benefit. So I think, over the past 5 years, I still think of myself as very much an accessibility learner. There's still so much to learn, to lobby for, to kind of focus on and fix within the bank. But hopefully that gives you a sense of my role in sort of establishing our digital accessibility team, our agenda, our strategy, and our program. And I guess the final thought there is, Barclays, we've done a lot of work in this space, and we have an ambition to become the most accessible and inclusive FTSE company. So again, we're fortunate enough that we have, senior executive support and commitment that this isn't just sort of CSR, corporate social responsibility do-gooding activity, but actually it's sort of fundamental to our business, right? It's about, doing good and doing well at the same time.
Paul, you mentioned that you were with at Gartner last year. Am I correct?
Yes.
So when you were at the event and just looking back to your career in accessibility, how do you think we are today when we talk in terms of accessibility? So when you were talking with Gartner, do you feel that you still have to explain yourself about what we are, what we are to do in accessibility, or they already understand it and realize how important it is?
Now, I think for a lot of organizations, they might know some of the basics, but I think there's still confusion and inconsistency in even these words of what we mean by accessibility or disability or inclusion. So I think many people think of diversity is something to do with, gender equality, for example. So again, it's starting from a low bar in terms of awareness for a bunch of technology senior leaders. Gartner, Forrester, these technology firms that are very influential in how technology executives listen to the trends that Gartner and others talk about. So often it's very much just boosting that awareness and a common understanding of what we mean by accessibility. And also showing them, some of the best practices, some of the successes we've had to encourage others to do more in this space. And I think when we think about accessibility in that sort of broader context of it has many benefits, accessibility kind of improves customer experience, it increases colleague productivity and engagement, it strengthens your brand, it mitigates risk and compliance and so forth. I think executives, technology, business executives really get that and get behind it. But I think sometimes we've kind of muddled in the past around the business case for accessibility was just the legal stick. And again, we sort of talk about, well, there's many reasons why accessibility matters and why it's important. So again, I think we see that speaking in that sort of language, more executives and businesses getting involved. As well as putting it in the terms that business folks understand. So we did some research in the autumn last year too about what is the purple pound, so the disposable spending power of disabled people and their households in the UK. So it was about £250 billion a year a couple of years back, and it's grown to about £265 billion, which is a kind of a sizable and growing amount of a neglected customer segment. And I know when we talk to other suppliers, other vendors, Barclays, we have about 1 million small and medium-sized businesses who bank with us. I think they kind of understand it in those sorts of terms of actually this is a substantial segment that's getting bad service today that many businesses are unaware of or neglecting. And I think having it in those sorts of conversations really does kind of whet appetites and increase interest of many businesses.
I think that's great, Paul. I think we're fairly well aligned in terms of how we view accessibility holistically and painting the broader benefits. I'm totally with you. I think that one of the things that I've found has connected with some of the senior leaders is the fact that actually it's driving innovation. People with disabilities and the challenges of impairment and inaccessibility are actually driving people to be innovative, to hack problems, to develop technologies that give businesses huge and deep insights into what's coming down the line, because often we're early adopters of new technologies, and plus because it gives us that ability to do stuff that we've not been able to do before, we tend to be somewhat more persevering in our approach to some of the bugs and everything else. We'll accept the technology early. We'll take the bleeding edge technology and we'll stick with it, maybe more than some other people. And I think we can benefit from that as broader businesses to really get insight into how we can build better technologies and adopt some of these things that are coming down the line.
Absolutely, Neil. I think the thing that I chuckled of when I was speaking to a technology executive and seeing them understand this point about innovation, that it's not about going on a pilgrimage to Silicon Valley to seeing these new funky startups, but often it's just, have you spent time with maybe older consumers that are trying to use your digital services, or trying to use your website, and figuring out some of the hacks, some of the workarounds, some of the novel ways they use your services. Finding innovation from the edges of the customers you already have is quite a, you can see a lot of light bulbs going off for technology executives thinking in those terms.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great point. And although I wouldn't say that we're that far on the edge, especially with the older population, actually, they're a sizable part of your business.
Yep. Yeah,
and it was never as easy as it is today to collect data from customers. Right. We are more organizations are more reachable, customers are more reachable. There's not really a reason why not to have this sort of engagement to improve the quality of services.
I agree. Yep. And speaking from the beautiful United States, we look at the brands, many of the brands in the UK, like Barclays Bank, and Atos is another one, and others that we've had on the program, and you really setting the bar high. And so we're working like crazy on this in the United States, and we have some great brands working on this. But when I look at what's happening across the world, I see organizations like Barclays and like Atos and others that you just seem to be doing a lot more. And one thing that gives me so much hope, somebody that cares so much about this community, and that somebody that is now a senior citizen, and there's 72 million baby boomers around my age in the United States, and we control 60% of the wealth in the United States still. And so we want to bank with Barclays. We want to do business with socially responsible organizations like Atos, and Atos is now in the United States. And I know Barclays has been in the United States a long time, but I like that you're being more proactive coming over here in the United States, and you care about our market. So we need leaders like the companies that are represented on this, interview right now, to continue to help CIOs understand why this is important. And as we all know, an executive from Atos or from Barclays Bank talking to a CIO is going to go a whole lot further than the community of people with disabilities saying, "What do you mean you're not including us?" Or the older citizens like me that are saying, "Well, you better include us because I'm not old, I'm young, I think." And so I want to do all of these things. And even the experience, Paul, that you were talking about with your back and all the things you walk, guess what? We're in these fragile human bodies, and sometimes we're temporarily disabled. So it's good for business. That's something we know, is accessibility is good for business. And I know you and Neil both are leaders talking about this, but it just continues to show us that business to business conversations are critical to keep things moving forward. I'm going to go back over to you, Neil. And Paul, I don't know if you want to address that.
No, I think you're completely right. I think we've certainly realised that actually as we differentiate ourselves with some of the great work we do in terms of accessibility, seeing that actually winning business from many other organisations, and realising that actually we can use our brand to influence more suppliers, vendors, businesses to also sort of see this as an important agenda. You know, we recognise we have to educate folks, right? And that involves kind of creating, you know, better resources, better summaries, better videos and infographics to really sort of, again, kind of increase a common understanding of what we're talking about.
I think it's really, really crucial that we influence our supply chains. And I know that we've been talking about this and working together on it for a long time. So maybe I'll take a different tack, because there's some really big stuff happening in banking right now. There's some really big changes happening. So aside from the sort of GDPR data stuff, you've also got all of these changes to how personal data is handled and things like PSD2. So maybe you're better at explaining, you know, the changes in banking and what those implications are than I am. But yeah, these are fairly seismic changes, right?
Sure. Yeah, no, they are. There's been a lot of bank regulation over the last few months. It feels like, you know, it was 10 years ago that we had the global banking crisis. And what we're really seeing now, 10 years on, is some of the changes to bank legislation hitting. So you're right, in the UK, we have sort of ring fencing, breaking up banks between the high street retail banking and the more riskier investment banking or casino banking operations. We have open banking and PSD2, which in the UK or Europe, respectively, is kind of increasing the interconnectedness of banks. So there's lots of regulation going on. There's some data protection stuff as well. You know, there's sort of WCAG 2.1 coming in terms of accessibility. But then there's also sort of fintechs and startups, you know, coming in to challenge more traditional banks. And the way we do our banking is also changing, right? So, you know, embracing and taking advantage of digital channels. So whether you use your mobile banking app, you know, we see these trends that doing that on a simpler, you know, tinier smartphone screen makes it really easy for people to kind of find their bank balance, to manage their money and make payments and view transactions. So that kind of simpler screens really focuses in on making it really as usable for everyone as possible on a tiny screen, right down to how you actually, you know, do the security steps, like using your fingerprints, or in the last month, we've added on to Face ID using facial recognition to access our smartphone apps, you know, right down to voice biometrics using your voice print when you call up telephone banking. So all of these things are kind of helping in terms of simpler and safer ways of doing your banking. I think the way we buy stuff now with contactless is also helping people to buy stuff that would have had a number of barriers at, you know, shops and restaurants. So using sort of their contactless debit card or their smartphones and Apple Pay is kind of helping too. And then really there's a sort of point about, as technology has got smarter, it enables us to do more things. So I remember hearing that 90% of the interactions that Barclays have with our customers, they're not speaking to a human in a bank branch, or they're not speaking to a human at the end of the phone. They're, you know, through a screen, and half of those screens are customer screens, i.e. your smartphone in your pocket or your home PC, and half of those screens are our cash machines and kiosks in our high street bank branches. So as your smartphones got smarter, you know, we can add on all these simpler, seamless security steps. Or, you know, we can use your camera so you can take a snapshot of a paper check and have it you know, processed and paid far quicker than it would take to trot down to your local bank branch. You know, likewise, cash machines are enabling us to do more things on them, but we also need to make sure that they are accessible and they work for everyone. So, you know, big push there, right down to one of the things in the last couple of months we've switched on is contactless. So rather than struggling to get your debit card in and out, and the little fraud slots we put over the top to minimize the risk of fraud and card skimming. Again, that's really tough if you've got arthritis. So having that same near-field communication and NFC technology, so you can tap your debit card, you can tap your smartphone, you can interact with the cash machine, it's kind of not rocket science, right? It's just multiple ways to do a similar things of how you let the bank know that you are who you say you are, and pop your debit card in. All these things help. I think, in terms of AI, we're seeing quite a lot happening in terms of changing the way we view our bank statements, which are kind of hideous tables of kind of cryptic clues of where we've spent our money over sort of recent days, and having that in far more categorized and better ways to visualize, to present, to make sense, whether you're a visual learner or not, is really helping. So AI machine learning to categorize your monthly ingoings and outgoings, of sort of how much are you spending on food or bills or coffee or gym and whatnot, is really going to help. As is sort of robo advisors and that sort of financial advisor bots helping us make the most of our money. So, are your savings in the highest interest accounts, or are you getting the cheapest loans and credit cards? It's kind of making banking a lot more easier for many people, and less kind of taxing and complex than it ought to be, than it should be. But I think really this point of open banking is kind of creating a lot more competition and choice. So in the UK, in the last couple of months, 9 of the big banks have had to open up, so using APIs. So this view that I might bank with 3 different banks, I might historically have to go to 3 different websites or apps. And now I can say that, well, actually, I own my financial data, so I can choose to give permission to each of those 3 banks and take my financial data somewhere else online. So I can view the sort of the full picture of my, and better manage, make the most of my money. And that's really quite interesting, because it means if I had 3 different banks that had really rubbish, inaccessible websites or apps, I could take my data and I could choose to view it somewhere else online. So there's far more competition now, and far more focus in terms of innovation on banks creating, the most usable and accessible digital experience. So again, lots of innovation happening. And when we think about the accessibility angle too, obviously the nirvana, a long way away, but the nirvana is we want customers to be able to say, well, look, I might have an access need. I might need stuff in, say, large print, and having that rippled and shared across many banks, many utility providers and broadband and so forth is the nirvana. There's obviously a lot more trust that needs to happen in terms of the plumbing of how personal data is shared between banks and others to get there. But I think this open banking is only a good thing for many customers with access needs, in giving them greater choice, greater freedom of where they go online to sort of manage their money, and hopefully doing that in a far simpler and accessible way. So does that make sense?
Absolutely, and that was what I was referring to. Forgive me for using acronyms when I was talking about PSD.
Okay.
Yeah, in terms of that was the acronym for the legislation, and obviously, not everyone's going to be familiar with all of the acronyms for the legislation. So, Deborah, you had a comment, I believe.
Well, I'm always so entranced by, Paul, the work that you're doing at Barclays, because I have worked with many, many brands all over the world. And I'm not going to say the name of this brand, but there is a brand that I think this is very common, where they call their older customers that are not as PC literate or tablet literate, they call them laggers. And they find these customers annoying, and these customers are actually more expensive to serve because they're not going to use the technology that you're pushing out to us. And so I remember they brought me in and asked me to train on accessibility. And I really talked about, the accessibility was certainly for people with disabilities, but it helps all customers, including customers that are older, that might not have the sophistication with technology. And I just can't help wonder why Barclays cares about this. I mean, of course you care about it because it's good for business, but why is Barclays, and once again, I know Atos is a leader in this and other brands, but I'm just fascinated and wondering how we can get more of this in the United States, selfishly, because we often don't view our banks and our financial organizations in many countries as wanting to work with us and make sure that we have everything that we need to successfully be banking. And you use the example of multiple banks. Well, I bank with 3 different banks as well. I bank with Virginia Credit Union, which I love our credit union here. But as a business and a business that works internationally, that's just not really how they're made. So I went and I started working with Capital One, who's done a lot of efforts with accessibility. But then Capital One decided to close all their branches. And I don't go to the branch that often, but sometimes I have to go to the branch. I have to go to the branch. So I changed my banking relationship to an international bank, and Barclays wasn't an option for me. Come on, Paul. So I went with Bank of America, who they've been wonderful. I've loved being with them, but I'm with 3 banks right now. I still have my Capital One open. I still use their credit cards. I have Bank of America. I have Virginia Credit Union, which we love personally. But I just don't see the attention to the customers as much as I'm seeing with Barclays. And so I don't know why. But once again, I'm just so glad that we have leaders, business leaders, talking to each other so that we all can grow from this. Yep. So I'm not sure why. Help me understand why Barclays cares about this so much, Paul.
Yeah, I think you're right, Deborah, that, banks, as they have digitized their services, there's a fundamental point here that we need to make sure that we don't leave out or leave behind anyone. So whereas a bank used to be a place you'd go to on the high street or at the mall to sort of do your banking business, as it moves to digital, it's really important that we still keep that channel choice, that we recognize that some customers, may choose or prefer to kind of go to their local bank branch and speak to the same person they've always spoken to. We need to make sure that those buildings are themselves, build environment accessible and frontline staff clearly trained up in terms of accessibility and disability confidence and whatnot. But we also need to make sure that the digital services that we build are easy to sort of see, hear, understand, and use for everyone. So again, I think sometimes, many banks focus on digitalization being the sole answer, but it's not. And I think the other underlying point you're making there is really around, well, in some countries, this view of what's driving accessibility, well, it's the law, it's compliance. When we focus on processes and standards and checklists, it kind of gets us so far to building compliant products. But we need to recognize that that's kind of like this, that's not the finish line. In fact, that's kind of the start line. And when we think about, people who come in all different shapes and sizes, when we think about partnerships and really understanding from the edges kind of what more we can do to better serve customers, and often our older and richer customers. Again, when we focus on these things and we build the right culture from the inside, we don't just build compliant products, but better ones. And I think getting more banks, more businesses to kind of realize that, to pay attention, not just to the kind of average customers, but actually to all of them, and in particular disabled and older customers with their unique access needs. It's just sort of better customer service, right? Of, well, how can we better meet your needs? Kind of how do you prefer to do your banking? And let's make sure that we still keep that choice and we don't switch things off as we solely move to digital.
So, Paul, do you think you also have a responsibility with the digital divide, making sure that we don't, in that case, that you don't leave customers behind?
Yeah, absolutely. So I see, when I hear this term digital divide, I think, well, there's the first one about what we've talked around there. So the first digital divide, that maybe, older customers don't want to use our website or our mobile apps, and we need to make sure that we still keep channels open. So going to your local high street bank branch, and that's what most people think of when we hear this term digital divide. But I think we also need to be mindful of that we're getting into a point where there's a sort of a second digital divide of, particularly our older consumers that have been comfortable using the basics of digital channels, of Skyping their grandchildren and whatnot, and so social media and kind of really helping with social isolation and so forth. And I think as these things change, as we see more more software being pushed and updated and refreshed and new interfaces all the time, I think that becomes incredibly confusing and draining for many silver surfers. And there's this kind of view of this sort of second digital divide, which is around folks who are comfortable doing the basics online up to a point. But as the pace of change has increased, you know, their kind of tolerance levels has kind of come down. And that's really the point of making sure that things are as simple and easy to use as possible, you know. And I think there's a lot of time and attention and focus being paid to how do we make sure that as we all age, as we all use, you know, social media and new whizzy tools to a point, that these really do kind of work for everyone and they don't kind of confuse us.
You're preaching to the converted here. Absolutely with you in terms of seeing and feeling the change fatigue that customers are having. I think that we see that amongst the older generation, but we even see this in the business that we're delivering, where we're delivering a lot of services to people in businesses, and the constant learning requirement for not just new technologies, but even technologies that you're using every day are now changing regularly, is wearisome for people and is a challenge. So we can't put the genie back into the bottle, but what we have to do, I think, is like you said, make sure that the interfaces that we're presenting to people don't have to change too frequently, or changes that we do make are obvious. One of the things that is a bugbear for me, and I know for a lot of other people, is where we start hiding stuff. So the trend to give people a lovely, beautiful, clear screen,
yeah,
with nothing on it. Like, well, where have all of my buttons gone? Well, yeah, so, yeah, it looks lovely, but you don't know where to start. And I think that if you're the developer, you know, you've got in your head where this is, but your audience don't necessarily, and that's where user testing becomes really important. And I know you do a lot of testing with real people, as well as, you know, you've developed personas, but that user testing is important, isn't it?
Absolutely, yeah. I think there's a lovely quote, Neil. I think Albert Einstein said, you know, we need to make things as simple as possible, but not simpler, which is this view that, you know, we need to make things as clear and concise as we can, but not really kind of, you know, dumb it down and kind of lose the message and confuse people in the process. I think your point about the pace of change and fatigue is really important. I think someone was telling me the other day about how, you know, Microsoft, it took them 20 years or so to kind of get to full market dominance of kind of personal PCs and operating systems. You know, in recent years, Google search, it's taken them sort of 5 years to become sort of, you know, market dominance. And in the last couple of years, we've seen what sort of Uber and Amazon Alexa kind of get there for their kind of respective markets. So it kind of shows you that, wow, you know, things are really quickening up. And it's great to see, okay, well, Alexa, it was accessible out of the gate, right? So for many older people with dexterity needs or visual difficulties, you know, they could kind of, they could use that conversational interface. I think for many older people who were using taxi firms, you know, could they use Uber? Well, it was kind of questionable. In some places, yes, in others, no. And, you know, Uber's done some great stuff around accessible vehicles and so forth, largely driven by regulation and in many cities to kind of put that in place. But there is that point there that with all these new emerging technologies, you know, sometimes it's not just the sort of laws and legislation that lags, but sometimes it's actually the assistive technologies lag them. You know, we've seen latest versions of Firefox and it breaking on many screen readers and so forth. And that's quite difficult if you're kind of reliant on that in the, you know, in the workplace to do your day job. I think we're seeing that built-in accessibility features on your sort of, you know, devices and smartphones are getting a lot better, and they're getting to the point of being comparable. But it's interesting, I sort of think that although our devices are packed with all these accessibility settings, the next challenge is, of course, how do we make those accessibility settings kind of how do we make the accessibility usable, so i.e., for people to kind of find it, to learn it, to make the most of it, to master it. So I think that's going to be the next challenge when we think about the accessibility industry in AT. We're at that, we've kind of build it and they will come. There's jam-packed full of accessibility settings, but let's face it, many people who could make use of it just simply aren't aware of it. So how do we increase and sort of auto-adjust and personalize our devices? How do we kind of really aid people to kind of make the most of that? It is going to be a really interesting challenge.
Thank you. One final question before we close, and that's really, what sort of trends are you seeing in the industry, and how do you think that the role of an accessibility professional is evolving? Are you having a South Korean analyst moment there? As the family returns.
Oh,
yeah. Yes.
Yeah, I've got two noisy children that have just wandered home. So that was a subtle let's shut the door and hope they don't photobomb Daddy.
Yeah.
So yeah, you were saying trends in accessibility, sort of a genuine profession. Yeah. So we kind of covered some of them, right? About sort of built-in accessibility has got better. The sort of subscription models, and this view about kind of personalization. I think when I think about the role of an accessibility professional, we've kind of talked before about this this mindset shift of actually what we're building at Barclays is kind of the right culture is one where we view accessibility not as a legally you have to do it, but as a commercial and morally we want to do it. Yeah. And that's kind of about this blend of kind of inspiring hearts and educating heads and enabling hands. And ultimately it needs accessibility professionals to be sort of technically savvy, to know their way around kind of programming HTML and whatnot, but also having the right business skills to drive change and the right people skills to do, user testing, to consult with people, to find out what's broken and what more we need to do. So there's that kind of hybrid skill set needed of accessibility professionals. Many organizations are also seeing this point about we need to take a holistic approach in how we improve our organization's accessibility. So the services, the culture, and these benchmarking tools like I know Business Disability Forum that Neil, you and I sit on, and their maturity model is one way of kind of helping on that front. Because I think that's really important. The sort of advice, if I could give back to myself when I started, was sometimes around about kind of what absolutely should, what's important. It's not that you failed, but it's the customers that you're failing, and making sure that we kind of humanize the conversations. So the wow moments when we get accessibility right and the pain points when we get it wrong is kind of really important to kind of close.
Yeah, I agree, Paul. You're breaking up slightly, but I agree. The
really resonates with people why it's important.
Yeah, the human element is how we connect. It's how we connect with our customers. It's how we connect with the people in our decision-making arms of our businesses, and it's through that human connection that we can take this forward. It's been a great chat again today. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for sharing your thoughts, and thank you for your continued support for Access Chat. It's been a real pleasure.
Well, thank you, and keep doing what you're doing, guys.
Thank you, Paul. Thanks for raising the bar for all the other brands. We appreciate it.
Thank you.